The Little Prince. You know it, right? For pretty much everyone, it's one of the most gentle, wise, and just plain beloved stories ever told. It seems so simple. A pilot crashes in the desert and meets this little boy from another planet.
It's where we get some of the most beautiful and comforting lines in all of literature. I mean, who hasn't heard that quote? It's a story all about seeing the world with the heart, with the pure, clear eyes of a child.
But what if I told you it's also a story about, well, these things? Yeah, dark, messy, incredibly adult themes that are hiding right there, just under the surface of this sweet little fairy tale.
So today, we are going to peel back the layers of this classic. We're going to uncover the turbulent, the tragic, and believe it or not, the surprisingly political story that's been hidden in plain sight this whole time.
Okay, so let's dive in. Before we get to all the hidden secrets, we first have to get our heads around the sheer scale of this book. This isn't just some classic story. It's a global cultural cornerstone, for real.
To put this into perspective for you, think about the Harry Potter series, a modern-day phenomenon, right? That's been translated into about 80 languages. The Little Prince? Over 270. It's not even close.
In fact, in all of human history, there's only one book that's been translated into more languages, and that's the Bible. This little story about a boy and his flower sits at number 2. That's just wild.
And the number of copies sold? Honestly, it's impossible to track after all these years, but the estimates put it way over 300 million. It's a story that has literally touched almost every corner of the globe. So who was the man who created it?
Well, the author Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, his life was way more turbulent and adventurous than the gentle little world he dreamed up. And his real life is the first key to unlocking what this book is really about.
Now, what's so fascinating is just how much this book is basically an autobiography. I mean, Saint-Exupéry wasn't just writing about some pilot. He was that pilot, a French aristocrat, a total daredevil aviator, and yep, he really did crash his plane in the desert. He always felt disconnected from the serious matters of adults, and he had a famously chaotic love life, which, don't worry, we are definitely getting to. The story is a direct reflection of his own life.
And here's where it gets kinda haunting. Saint-Exupéry's own ending is just as mysterious as his characters. In 1944, right in the middle of World War II, he took off on a mission and just vanished. For decades, nobody knew what happened. Then, piece by piece, the story started to come together. A fisherman finds his bracelet. Then they find wreckage from his plane on the seafloor. And finally, a German pilot comes forward and says he shot down a plane just like it on that very day. Just like the prince, the author disappeared, his body never found, leaving his story to become a legend.
So, this connection between his life and his story, it goes even deeper. You have to remember, this book was written in 1942, during some of the darkest days of the Second World War. Saint-Exupéry was an exiled pilot, and he basically poured everything he was seeing in the world into this story, turning it into a really powerful allegory. So what's an allegory? It's basically a story with a hidden layer. The characters, the events, everything on the surface stands for something bigger. Like, say, ideas about human life, or even a political situation. And in The Little Prince, they stand for the author's life and the war that was tearing the world apart.
Okay, so here's the secret decoder ring for the book. Those terrifying baobab trees that threaten to just rip the prince's tiny planet apart? That's a pretty clear symbol for the rising threat of Nazism and the Axis powers. And the difficult, vain, super demanding Rose, that's a direct portrait of his fiery wife, Consuelo. And the little prince himself, well, that's Saint-Exupéry's own inner child, that innocent part of him trying to make sense of a world gone mad.
So you see, the book's famous critique of adults, the ones who only care about numbers and how much things cost, that wasn't just some cute observation. It was a desperate cry from a man watching the world become obsessed with power and territory and money, all while forgetting what was actually essential.
But wait, the story doesn't stop there. In the last few years, a much darker reading has started to take hold. It's a modern psychological take that completely reframes the book's most beloved relationships in a really startling, kinda uncomfortable new light.
We all remember this scene, right? The fox teaches the prince about taming, about creating these special bonds that make one person unique out of 100,000 others. For generations, we've seen this as the heart of the book's message about love and friendship.
But what if we've been reading it wrong this whole time? What if taming isn't really about connection,
but about control and codependency.
This is where that modern interpretation comes in, applying the psychological concept of gaslighting to the prince's journey. And the argument is that he isn't being taught wisdom. He's actually being emotionally manipulated from start to finish.
So in this reading, the rose is emotionally abusive, constantly lying and making the prince feel guilty. The fox doesn't teach him about friendship, he teaches him that love is about need and obligation. The prince becomes so burdened by all this responsibility that he just can't take it anymore. And in this view, that famous ending, the snake bite, it's not a magical trip home to the stars. It's a suicide, a final, heartbreaking escape.
So, what is it then? Is it a beautiful children's story, a sad war allegory, or a dark psychological tragedy? Well, the answer seems to be yes, all of it.
And that's maybe the real genius of the book. Its enduring power isn't that it has one single, simple meaning. It's that its simple language is like a container, strong enough to hold all these complex and even contradictory ideas all at the same time.
It's almost like the book is a mirror. What you see in The Little Prince often says a lot more about you than it does about the book itself. A kid sees a magical adventure. An adult who's seen conflict might see the war allegory, and someone who's been in a tough relationship might see that psychological tragedy. The book meets you wherever you are.
And that really is the ultimate takeaway, isn't it? It's a book that grows up with you. The story you read when you're 10 is absolutely not the same one you read when you're 30 or when you're 60. It keeps revealing new layers, new truths, and new heartbreaks as you go through life.
So the next time you think about this simple little story, ask yourself, what does it mean to me right now, in this moment? Because the answer might just reveal something essential, not about some far-off star, but about you.
Ah, The Little Prince. Just the name brings back a certain feeling, right? For pretty much all of us. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's book is one of those timeless classics. It's a story we hold on to, a real touchstone for that sense of childhood wonder and, the wisdom of the heart. And this quote? This is pretty much the soul of the whole book. It's this beautiful, comforting idea that's taught so many of us to look past the surface of things, to really value what actually matters. Yeah, we've always seen it as this gentle little fable. You know the story. A small boy, his very special rose, a journey through the stars, and the incredible friendships he makes. It all just feels so pure and simple. But what if we've only been seeing half the picture? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical rereading of this classic. It's one that suggests there's a much darker, way more complex psychological drama hiding right there in plain sight. Okay, so let's start with the part of the story we all remember and love, that moment with the fox. This scene really seems to hold the key to the whole book's philosophy. The prince is feeling lonely, and the fox offers him the secret to making a real connection. It's all about this idea of taming. See, before he's tamed, the prince is just one little boy among thousands. But afterwards, he'll be completely unique in the whole world to the fox. And just look at how specific these instructions are. It's like a ritual, isn't it? This slow, careful process is what turns something ordinary into something extraordinary. It even makes the wheat fields meaningful because they'll remind the fox of the prince's golden hair. It's all about creating that shared meaning. And boom, here it is. This is the absolute core of the traditional reading. This is the big takeaway, right? That love isn't just some feeling, it's a deep, unbreakable responsibility. It's a really beautiful thought, and it feels like the moral cornerstone the entire story is built on. All right, but now we're going to take a hard turn. Some analysts, taking their cues from modern psychoanalysis, have looked at this same story, and they've seen something else, something way more unsettling. This question right here is what unlocks this whole new interpretation. It forces us to re-examine every single interaction, every relationship, but through a totally different lens. What if the thing we've always called love in this story is actually a blueprint for emotional abuse? There's a clinical term for it: You probably know it by another name: gaslighting. It's this really subtle, corrosive process. It's not about physical stuff. It's about twisting someone's reality so completely that they start blaming themselves for their own pain. Okay, so let's try this idea out. Let's start with the very first relationship in the book, the prince and his so-called beloved Rhodes. I mean, just look at her behavior when you think about it this way. She isn't just a little vain, she's manipulative. She uses guilt with those fake coughs, makes constant demands, and lies to keep the prince wrapped around her finger, always making him feel like he's just not doing enough. He is basically in her service 24/7, and it wears him out. And this is what the prince says to himself after he finally leaves her. On the surface, it just sounds like this really mature, kind of sad reflection on being young and not knowing better. But through this new lens of moral harassment, this line is just heartbreaking. Think about what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, wow, she was really difficult and demanding. Nope. He says, I failed. He's completely taken the blame. Her unhappiness was his fault. That right there is the abuser's ultimate win. So the prince actually does the healthy thing and gets away from his abuser. But then he meets the fox. And in this reading, the fox isn't some wise mentor. He's what you might call a secondary abuser. Let's just look at the language itself for a second. The word tame, it implies a hierarchy, doesn't it? Like a master and a pet. It's an unequal power dynamic from the start. A real relationship, though, is supposed to be between equals. The fox very cleverly blurs the line between the two, passing off a relationship based on control as if it's a bond of love. And that's the fox's real deception here. He doesn't help the prince heal at all. He actually validates the abuser's logic. He tells the prince that this toxic mess was a real bond, and now he's responsible for it forever. He basically tells the victim to turn around and go back, trapping him in guilt and making sure that cycle of abuse just keeps on going. So why does any of this matter? Why take this dark reading so seriously? Well, because this pattern, abuse that's disguised as love, control disguised as responsibility, it isn't just some literary theory. It's a devastatingly real thing in the human world, and it often gets passed down from generation to generation. Now, to see how this can play out, let's look at an extreme but very well documented example. Historians and psychologists have laid out in detail the severe abuse Hitler suffered as a child from his father. The theory goes that this deep, unresolved personal trauma was later projected outwards, becoming the source of unimaginable public violence. It's a truly chilling reminder of how private pain can lead to catastrophic public consequences. So the takeaway from this perspective is actually huge. That seemingly small, private tragedy of a kid being manipulated by a parent or a partner by another partner, when you multiply that across an entire society, it can create the psychological groundwork for much, much larger conflicts and disasters. So where does this all leave us with the story? Well, this new reading isn't asking us to just toss the book in the trash. It's asking us to look closer, just like the narrator asked us to do from the very first page. You remember this, right? It's the book's opening lesson. The grown-ups could only see the simple, obvious shape on the outside, a hat. They completely miss the complex and frankly kind of terrifying reality hidden on the inside. And that really is the whole point of this exercise. The goal isn't to cancel or ruin The Little Prince. It's to develop the very skill the book itself is championing, the ability to see what is essential, even when it's invisible. Or, more importantly, when it has been deliberately hidden from you. So, I'll leave you with this question. Whether it's in books, movies, or maybe even in our own lives, we are surrounded by stories that look like hats on the outside. But if we actually dare to look a little deeper, what elephants might we find waiting inside?